Hi, Roy here on my channel Roy Reads Anything. Anything, including vintage science fiction. Because it's July, it's the month of Rocket Summer, reading event devised by Michael K. Vaughan that's about looking at vintage SF. And there are co-hosts as well. Lots of great videos being done on this theme, and so linked down below. And there are prompts if you want to do them. Last week was the 1950s week, so the idea is read some science fiction from that decade, which I set out to do. And I had some ideas, but while we were making the last video, I sort of commented that the first book I'd read for pre-1939 was Skylark of Space, and then I'd read Legion of Space, so the two of spaces, and sort of speculating maybe you could do the whole thing with of space in the title. So I went on eBay and ordered a couple of books.
Of course you did.
The Shores of Space turned up. Shores of Space by Richard Matheson. As it says here, author of I Am Legend. It promises it'll be shocking. 13 strange and unusual stories set against the background of new worlds and fantastic futures. Futures. Also, a book to send shivers down your spine. So this is a British corgi paperback with their fabulous little logo of a dog carrying a book in its jaws, and that actually seems to have happened with this one, judging by the condition of it.
Do you think the late lamented Queen only read books published by Corgi?
Probably, yeah. They ought to be by appointment.
By appointment to the Queen's Corgi.
This is one of the things that confused me as a little kid, because there were Corgi books and there were Corgi toys.
Oh, yes!
So I assumed they were from the same place. And Esso invited you to put a tiger in your tank, and there was Tony the Tiger advertising Frosties. So I sort of thought, do you put Frosties in your car to make it go?
What a very confused young boy you must be.
Yes. Anyway, The Shores of Space is a short story collection from the 50s by Richard Matheson. Very different from the pulpy space opera stuff I'd been reading before. Here's a writer where you get dialogue that people might actually say, and you get the so-called adult themes as well popping up. And it's good, I enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it. Let's see. There are various themes in this. Now, it'd be ridiculous to kind of make grand claims based on reading 3 books, but here in the 50s, it seems you're getting the famous 50s paranoia. Because Shores of Space, none of the stories involve anyone going into space. Sometimes space things come to Earth, so I suppose the idea is we're on the shore and space is this other thing. But they tend to be menaces. There's a couple of alien invasion stories with novel ways of the aliens arriving, but they're not up to any good. And you get post-apocalyptic stories, the bomb has apparently dropped. There's a particularly powerful story called The Last Day, which is sort of speculate how would people behave if just the world is going to end tomorrow, like the sky's full of a gigantic sun, so that's it. What would people do? And it's a pretty horrible scenario with some redemption, but horrible. Redemption.
Horrible.
So, yeah, good collection. It didn't feel very, shall we say, rockety. I was attracted to this read-along by its poetic title of Rocket Summer, and the sort of spacefaring stuff did feel really nice. So these stories they're almost, some of them are like horror stories really, using science fiction as a way to generate the menaces. So I was looking at the book, and it reminded me not just of corgis in general, but the colour scheme of the book, and the spine with a green spine with bold yellow letters. It's very reminiscent of something I could recall from childhood. And looking at the list of books, other books they publish, well, that's interesting too, because there's some I've never heard of and some that are really famous. The Sands of Mars by Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke, BSc, FRAS. And that, I remembered then, like Proust biting into his Madeleine, memories are summoned up. I could remember the Sands of Mars being on our bookshelves when I was a kid growing up. There were science fiction books in the house, which to start with, I could only really look at the pictures on the covers, but eventually I read some of them. And I did read some of the Arthur C. Clarke ones. I think Childhood's End, ironically, was one of the first adult books I read. We had Sands of Mars in this edition, which has a fantastic cover, a really beautiful painting. You got rockets, you got a sort of alien landscapes. It's got some nice design, and you've got this sort of abstract atom thing, which is like bars with coloured connecting coloured spheres, just as a sort of device, which was very much, now it looks like a real retro book, but at the time that sort of atomy stuff was like you'd get it in design of things like furniture. Yeah,
clocks and furniture and lamps.
We had the book coat rack. Yeah, lamps, all that sort of stuff. So yes, so very evocative. So I thought, well, why not read that then as well? So even though it is now by now like Sunday, the week is coming to an end, but I dialed up the Kindleometer and got them to send me the text of Sands of Mars by Arthur C. Clarke, which I read and really enjoyed. So now you've got hard SF, though it wasn't really called that then. I suppose it
was just called SF.
Really, yeah. I mean, there's lots of technical stuff. The first third of the book is a voyage from Earth to Mars. The setup, which is rather meta, is a science fiction writer is being given a sort of ride along on what's a sort of pilot for having a shuttle service to take passengers to Mars where there's a settlement. So there's this guy who's like initially looked down upon because he can't do astronaut stuff. He's an SF writer, and the real astronauts think his stories are a bit ridiculous and stuff like that. And there's some jeopardy in space with meteors and that kind of thing. But then they get to the settlement, and it's good. There's basically a mystery. There seem to be some things going on in the planet that weren't predicted, and there's basically terraforming. Again, not called that then. I think most of the things that happen in Kim Stanley Robinson's big chunk, Red Mars,
that we stopped listening to because it was so long.
We did not manage to get through the audiobook. I did read the novel a while ago. Yeah. I've not read the rest of the trilogy, but lots of that stuff is happening in this in a much more sort of compact way. So there's lots of interesting stuff about Mars, fairly plausible. I think it's meant to be around about the year 2000 that it's all happening.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask if there are any slingshot manoeuvres in it, or is this pre-slingshotting?
No, there's things you would probably recognise. I mean, some of it is real, like slide rule toting,
Excellent.
Proper science. Yeah. I mean, this is Arthur C. Clarke was a famous guy when I was growing up. He was one of the sort of a big three of science fiction writers. 2001 had made him really famous, and you'd see him on television with his horn-rimmed glasses. So he did look like the very personification of kind of science-based positive futurism.
Boffin.
Like a boffin. Yes, you trusted him. He had supposedly kind of dreamed up communication satellites, and in this, there are some predictive things. He kind of casually invents the fax machine, which is good. And there are some anachronisms as well, like the astronauts are allowed to smoke on the spaceship. And when the writer guy questions it, because doesn't that use up the oxygen? He says, "Oh, there'd be a riot if we didn't let people that."
They'd rather die of oxygen starvation than have us take their fags away.
Yeah, basically that happens. And they still have newspapers, but they're very thin to make them like super light for space. But it's really enjoyable. Clarke's optimistic view of this technical future, where there's kind of frontier problem solving happening on the fly, is quite beguiling. And it's not just a sort of pure science story. There's a subplot that's human relationships that isn't terrible. And it's a pretty satisfactory book, really. I sort of had to filter his rather knowing authorial voice sometimes. There's that sort of slight irony of the author is sort of in there sometimes. Like I don't know, there's the kids are in school on the thing, and it describes them as being endurance vile. Things like that you wouldn't be out of place in a Dickens novel. But I drifted away from my of space plan because it's Sands of Mars. So the other book I'd ordered finally showed up yesterday. Colonists of Space by Charles Carr. Again, fantastic painting on the front. 50s, I think it first came out in the early 50s, and this paperback is late 50s. Wardlock, shilling and sixpence. It's somewhere between a book and a magazine because it's got adverts throughout it. Unfortunately, this cover, not chewed by a dog. It's got this cluster of little holes on the front that then make dents in the early pages. So it's I can only describe it as what would happen if a leprechaun had shot at it with a miniature blunderbuss.
Because they do that sort of thing all the time.
Well,
they're not all about the shamrocks and the green guineas.
No, they're about destroying vintage paperbacks.
With their little blunderbusses.
Anyway, Colonists of Space. Now, I think it would be like Monday by then in your human denomination. So I'd already broken the surly bonds of the 1950s week and was floating free in what should be the 1960s week. But it's Colonists of Space. So I've started reading this as well. Thought it'd be interesting to read like an unknown writer as compared with Clarke, famous writer. This guy, it's a pseudonym for Sidney J. Mason, who mainly wrote westerns, but he did write a couple of SF novels. Colonists of Space. There's a ship called the Colonist flying out into space to colonise an Earth-like world. So I don't think this is going to go on the post-colonial literature list somehow. Again, it's pretty old school, but there's lots of female characters in it, so I'll report on this in my final wrap-up. So that I'm afraid the 50s will have to bleed into the 1960s a bit, because I've got an of space book from the 60s on my Kindle as well. So it's all falling into place. Of space. Yes, I did remember. Another memory surfacing is my nan saying about science fiction. So what is it you like about these books then? Is it the rockets? Which for some reason threw me into a kind of paroxysm of sort of teenage embarrassment. But is it the rockets? And coming round to the idea, maybe it is Rocket Summer. Okay, that's all for now. Back soon with something else.